Okay, you've got a big history test on the 20th century breathing down your neck. Feeling a little buried under all the dates, names, and events? Don't even worry about it. In the next few minutes, we're going to crack this thing wide open and turn that study guide of yours into the ultimate key for acing your test.
Look, I totally get it. The 20th century was, well, it was a lot. You've got these huge wars, competing ideologies, complicated treaties, economic meltdowns. It can feel like a giant, messy puzzle. But here's the secret. The key isn't just memorizing a bunch of random facts. It's about seeing how all those pieces actually connect. And that is exactly what we are going to do right now. All right, let's dive in. This study guide right here, this is our roadmap. It's got everything you need broken down into 3 columns. First, the big ideas, the concepts. Second, the historical events where those ideas actually happened. And third, the specific vocabulary you need to use to sound like you know what you're talking about and get those top marks. Our whole goal here is to build bridges between these 3 columns. We're going to do this in 4 simple parts. First, we'll nail down the core concepts. Then we'll jump into the key historical events. After that, we are going to master the vocabulary for the test. And finally, and this is the most important part, we'll tie it all together so you can walk into that test feeling like you own this stuff. Ready? Let's do it. Okay, first up, part 1, the core concepts. I want you to think of these as the engine of history. There are the what and the why behind everything else. If you don't get these fundamental ideas, the events themselves just won't make sense. So this is our foundation. So to make this a little easier, let's group some of these ideas together. We're going to start with what I like to call the ideologies of power. These are the core beliefs that really drove nations to do the things they did. Now, pay close attention here, because the difference between these two is subtle but absolutely crucial. Nationalism is basically just pride in your country. Simple enough, right? But ultranationalism, that's nationalism on steroids. It adds that key ingredient of aggression and hostility towards other countries. Your teachers love to ask about this distinction, so make sure you've got it locked in. And that idea of aggressive ultranationalism leads us straight into fascism. So fascism takes that ultranationalism and builds on it. It adds a dictator, it crushes anyone who disagrees, and it puts the government in total control of, well, everything. When you see fascism on your test, you need to be thinking dictator, no opposition, total control. Got it? All right, next up, a really important distinction you have to know. Domestic policy versus foreign policy. Think of it this way. Domestic policy is all the stuff a country does at home, inside its own borders, like its laws or economy. Foreign policy is how it deals with the rest of the world. You know, making alliances, signing treaties, or going to war. Understanding the difference here is key to analyzing why nations acted the way they did. Okay, so we've got the concepts down. Now for the fun part. Welcome to part 2, the key historical events. This is where we take those ideas we just defined and see how they actually played out on the world stage. This is the story, the when and the why of the 20th century. Here's a quick mental map for you. Just look at the flow of events. You see a massive war, followed by a treaty that tries to fix everything, which then leads to economic disaster and the rise of some really extreme ideas, which, you guessed it, leads to another even bigger war. It's like a domino effect. Seeing that pattern is so important. Okay, if you're going to memorize just one thing for your test about World War I, please make it this, the MAIN causes. M for militarism, building up armies. A for alliances, all those secret pacts. I for imperialism, countries competing for colonies. And N for nationalism, that big idea we started with. Seriously, this acronym is your absolute best friend for the test. And this table perfectly explains why the peace after World War I was so shaky. Just look at what everyone wanted at Versailles. You've got Wilson from the US, the idealist, pushing for lasting peace. Then you've got Clemenceau from France, who basically just wants revenge and to make sure Germany can never attack again. And then there's Lloyd George from Britain, who's like, yeah, let's punish them, but not so much that we can't trade with them. With everyone wanting something different, a perfect treaty was pretty much impossible from the start. So how did that messy peace lead to the Nazis? Well, it was a clear and tragic process. First, they tapped into all that German anger about the Versailles Treaty and the desperation from the Great Depression. Then, once they had some support, they used the system to legally give themselves total power with something called the Enabling Act. From there, they started targeting minorities with the Nuremberg Laws, and finally, they put their ultranationalist ideas into action with the super aggressive foreign policy. One step led right to the next. All right, now for part 3, mastering the vocabulary. Listen, knowing the concepts and the events is half the battle. But to really crush this test, you have to speak the language of history. These are the words that are going to make your answers sound sharp, precise, and confident. So let's group these into themes again to make it easy. This first batch is what I call the words of conflict. These are all the action words, the nouns and verbs of war and aggression.
Just look at these. Words like militarism, propaganda, total war. Then you have the actions: to have violated a treaty, the annexation of land, the persecution of a people. And then you get super specific words like Lebensraum and Anschluss that are tied directly to Nazi Germany. Using these correctly in an answer shows your teacher you know exactly what you're talking about.
And on the flip side of all that conflict, we have the words of negotiation. This is the language of diplomacy, of treaties, and, well, the often failed attempts to stop a war from happening.
Here you see words like negotiate, provisions, and conditions. These are literally the building blocks of any treaty. Reparations and compensation are all about paying for the damages of war. And self-determination, that was that key idea from President Wilson we talked about, the idea that nations should get to choose their own destiny. These are the words you'll use to break down any peace agreement.
And that brings us to the final, and I mean the most important section. Part 4. This is where the magic happens. We're going to take a concept from column 1, connect it to an event in column 2, and then describe that connection using the precise vocabulary from column 3. This right here is the formula for an A+ answer. So what does this actually look like in practice? Let's walk through one complete example, connecting all the dots just like you're going to do on your test. Okay, let's start with a concept from column 1, Lebensraum. In simple terms, this was the Nazi idea that Germany needed more living space and that they had a right to take that space from other countries, especially in Eastern Europe. It's a perfect example of their ultra-nationalist ideology in action. Now we connect that concept to the history in column 2. The idea of Lebensraum wasn't just some abstract thought. It was the direct motivation for the rise of the Nazis. It was the justification for their aggressive foreign policy, which, of course, led straight to the Second World War. See that link? The concept drove the event.
But see, the crucial point is how you actually explain all this in an answer. It's not enough to just say, Lebensraum was important. You have to use the specific vocabulary from column 3 to explain exactly how and why it was so important.
And this is what a great test question looks like. It literally combines all 3 columns for you. It asks how a concept, Lebensraum, fulfilled a foreign policy objective, that's one of our testing words, and led to a specific action, the annexation of territory, giving a specific example, the Anschluss. Your job is just to connect those dots. You can do this. You've got this. Good luck.